Welcome, everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. All lines are muted. However, we do want this to be an interactive session, so please ask questions by using the questions section of your control panel at any time throughout the event. We'll aim to keep this around 45 minutes so that we do have time for additional questions at the end. If we don't get to a specific question, we'll definitely reach out to you separately after the session is ended. All right, well, thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm Renee Gorman with Allegis Global Solutions, and I've been in the industry now for 20 years and with AGS for almost 10 years. I'm the senior manager for our North America Market Analytics team, and I'm really looking forward to the next hour because we'll be discussing the latest in economic trends and how these trends are impacting the labor market. We'll also be discussing several data-driven strategies to support successful talent attraction and retention, both in the short term and in the years to follow. So to kick us off, I'd like to turn it over to Ron Hetrick. He's going to share with us a state of the state on what's currently happening in the labor market. Over to you, Ron.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let me get this thing loaded up here. And there we go. All right, well, let's first tell you a little bit about myself. If you don't know me, I'm Ron Hetrick. I have been a labor economist for over 30 years, started at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I currently work for Lightcast, who is a labor data company. We kind of specialize in kind of educating people what's going on in the market. Now, 2 years ago, I was the lead author of an article called Demographic Drought, which has kind of caught a little bit of fire, just explaining why we're in the situation that we're in. Why can't we find workers? Why has this been such a problem? Towards the end of last year, I was the co-lead author of another article called Who is Going to Do the Work? So I'm going to be sharing you kind of excerpts from a presentation I've been giving around the country about these issues, you know, the demographic drought, but also the issues that we're having right now with just finding people to do this work. So with that in mind, I want to jump in. We're going to kind of dive into this thing. I'm going to talk kind of quickly. We're going to cover a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, the important part of this is that you walk away from this understanding that what we're experiencing right now is not temporary. This is something that's the beginning of something that's going to be very impactful over the next 10 to 15 years. So to do this, we have to first understand why are we in the situation that we're in. And you've heard of kind of some different things around this kind of gray tsunami, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But this first key takeaway that I want to give, and this is more than anything, is that we did a survey towards the end of last year for who's going to do the work, where we interviewed 1,500 high school students, okay? And we're asking these high school students, what are your plans? And we found out that for our survey, now our survey was a little bit biased because of the kind of person that we interviewed. About 85% of our respondents said, I'm going to get a 4-year degree, okay? But when we look at the type of jobs that make up our economy, about 2 to 3 out of every jobs do not require a 4-year degree. And we started to realize there's this mismatch that's kind of occurring. And so we're hearing a lot of different things lately. A lot of kids may be being jaded with college, or, you know, not as many want to go, but we do find out that most students do enroll in college immediately after graduation. So it poses a lot of problems depending on the kind of industry, the kind of HR people you are, the kind of people you're trying to hire. But let's talk about why we're kind of in the problems that we have. So you've heard this thing called the gray tsunami, and this is kind of this wave of boomers that went through the population. So just so you know, when the baby boomers entered the labor force, it was the early 1970s. So not only did you have more children entering the labor force, but you had women entering the labor force in earnest for the first time in history. So these two people now balloon up our labor force. When we have both people in a household who are now working, it's very competitive. If you want to work, because there's a lot of people looking for jobs, you have to differentiate yourself. So you start going to college, you start getting certificates that we invented. Anything to separate yourself from the people around you. But it's really important that you understand something about this group of people, about the boomers. Very driven. They were the yuppies of the 80s. They worked 70, 80-hour work weeks, often to the sacrifice of the things around them. Very devoted to their jobs, very focused on money, accumulating a lot of money, okay? So that huge population, very driven population, wealthy population, has now moved into retirement age, and we are kind of in the middle to second stages of retirement ages for boomers. So this is a really important aspect that we're going to have to understand, that population's impact. So as the boomers have started to move into retirement, millennials are now the largest part of our labor force. But when the millennials took over as the largest part of the labor force, we saw something happening, and that is that more and more people were saying, I don't want to work. So the millennials just have a bit of a lower labor force participation rate than what we were seeing, of course, from their boomer parents. So you can see that this was a long-term trend. It was starting to come up towards the end, but that was mostly being driven by women. We've been seeing men kind of disappearing from the labor force now for several decades. So this is our situation. Boomers are on their way out of the labor force. The remaining labor force is a little less interested in working in the way that we were seeing the boomer population do that. So we have this kind of labor crisis that we're feeling. And this labor crisis is explained primarily in the next two slides. But if you get a visual here, this is the one you're going to latch hold of. It's been about 2.5 years, right? Or, we're well past this intro stage of the pandemic. I mean, what are we coming up on, like several years now? So labor force participation is not recovering. So we saw a big drop in people who say, I am either working or looking for work. And then that labor force participation started to come up, and then it's capped, and it's just not recovering back. And you're wondering, well, why is that not coming back? And it's actually pretty easily explained. If we go to this slide, you look on the right side, this is the number of people who say, I am out of the labor force. I am not working, and I am not looking to work. And if you look at that line in actual numbers, it was around 95 million. Now it's 100 million. So we are missing 5 million people. So they haven't died or anything. They have just dropped out of the labor force. They are no longer working or looking to work. If we go to the table on the left side, you can see that the predominant number of the people who've dropped out of the labor force are over the age of 55. Okay, so we are falling well short of the numbers that we need to keep this economy moving at the pace that we would like it to move because of this significant drop out of people over the age of 55. We're going to dive into that a little bit more in a second, but the second thing we want to understand is we have another problem in this country already where we have a very highly educated labor force. We don't know that about ourselves. We actually have way more people in our labor force who have at least an associate's degree up to a bachelor's degree. Our largest labor force population by far are people with a bachelor's degree compared to the people who only have a high school diploma or less. But if you look at the job openings, and right now, according to last November, the number was about 10.5, around 10.3, 10.5 million. That number is coming out again tomorrow. We expect it to drop a bit, but you do need to understand something. Most of the job openings that are out there are looking for people who do not have a college degree. These are restaurants, retail, construction, manufacturing, warehousing. A lot of jobs do not require people with a college degree. But if you look at the bottom right of this particular chart, you can see that we just don't have those people anymore. We don't have unemployed people who only have a high school diploma or less. We only have 2 million of those. And then you have a lot of college degree jobs who are dropping the college degree requirement because they also mistakenly believe that there's a lot of people who only have a high school diploma who are out of work. And it's simply not true. We actually have more people unemployed with a degree of some sort than we have without it. So our labor pools are kind of in a big mess. So this Korn Ferry is saying that by 2030, we're going to be at a deficit of 6 million workers here in the US. So we have 3 labor pools that can fill jobs. We have our native born population, we have legal immigration, and then we have undocumented or illegal immigrants that make up the population. So let's start to think about these labor pools. If we look at the past 10 years, the entering workforce, those people who typically take jobs under $20 an hour, that population's going down. If we look at the populations going up, it's all people above the age of 55. If you look at the projections from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on how we were going to grow our labor force to 2030, you can see that the vast majority of labor force growth that we were supposed to have was going to come from our 65 and older population. If you look at the bottom there, for the third decade in a row, they were projecting a decline in the entering population of our labor force, 16 to 24 years old. So we keep losing younger people. That population keeps declining, and our over 65 population keeps increasing. But there's a problem in that the labor force participation rate, something I've already discussed earlier, for people above the age of 55 is completely not recovering. These people are not coming back. And the reason is that vast majority of people who left during the pandemic shutdowns and did not come back are people over the age of 65. So these weren't there was a lot of belief that people retired early, but the numbers do not bear that out. It looks like these were people who were just kind of hanging on in the labor force and then decided to exit during this time. And as I discussed earlier, they have a lot of money and they can do that. So by 2034, we're going to have more older adults than children in our population for the first time in US history. So that's part of this that we're dealing with. The second part of this is immigration took a very significant hit during the pandemic. We weren't staffing our consulates, we weren't processing visas, and we ran into a deficit of about 2 million. We've gained about 1 million of that back. But these are also, immigrants are another population that tend to take those kind of sub $20 an hour jobs, sub $25 an hour jobs. It also affects IT in certain jobs as well. And we can see that we kind of took this as a simultaneous hit. At the same time, we were losing our older population and then our younger population was shrinking. Immigrants make up a very significant amount of our unskilled workers, but they also are a very significant part of healthcare. 1 out of every 4 doctors, 1 out of every 5 nurses, 1 out of every 4 health aides. And depending on the state you're in, they could be well more than that. So if we go down to undocumented, that's about 8.5 million of our workers in the US right now. That number has been kind of increasing, as you know. They make up a significant part of our food supply, of our construction. All of these populations are trying to they're participating in what we're trying to do. But as we look forward over the next decade, the labor force participation rate is not projected to increase. It is projected to continue to go down. So where we are today is going to continue to evolve in the wrong direction. So we're going to have a lot of industries over the next 10 years who are going to want to hire. You're going to want to eat, right? You're going to need healthcare. You're going to need people to take care of your housing. You're going to need policemen, firemen, garbage collectors, teachers, all of these people trying to hire, but we simply do not have enough people for that. So what we need to do is, a lot of people are like, well, is this going to be robotics? Is this going to be AI? And the reality is, if you read any articles out there, robots, AI are more kind of created to come along people rather than replace them. They tend to add jobs versus getting rid of them. So we don't have a future where there's going to be the rise of the robot army to take our jobs. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. We are going to have to get a lot more creative in the way that we bring people along. So basically, the actions that you take now, all of these things that you start to plan now, and you should be planning now, are going to affect the way that we do things going forward. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn this back over and we will start the Q&A part of this.
Great. Ron, thanks for sharing all of that really valuable insight. You know, the labor force, as you made so clear, has already evolved so much since the pandemic took place, and it's really interesting to see how it will continue to evolve and change in the coming years. And as expected, your presentation sets us up perfectly for our panel discussion. But before we jump into it, I do want to introduce the other experts that we have on the line today. So Sarah, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. Sarah Kushel. I'm with Brightfield. I have had the pleasure of playing various roles across the extended workforce industry the last 20 years. Brightfield being the last 9, where I've supported evolving the company to a data intelligence product organization and serving customers and partners with all things data. So automated analytics, benchmarking, cost savings. Great to be here today with all of you.
Excellent, thank you. And Tim?
Hi, Tim Johnson. I'm a business intelligence leader with Allegis, and I've been with the Allegis family of companies 27 years and the last 18 or so with AGS in various capacities, but mostly focused on data strategy at this point in time and making sure that we have the right partnerships, the right data available to us so that we can make data-driven decisions and provide our customers with insights.
Excellent. Tim, my first question is going to be for you. So we heard Ron share several interesting statistics and predictions on the labor market. And it's clear that for the foreseeable future, hiring leaders will be faced with volatile labor market conditions, continued economic uncertainty. When you think about developing a nimble, sustainable workforce strategy, where does an organization even start?
Yeah, that's a great question. For us, it starts with visibility. As we get into our customer engagements and we think about it even for ourselves, we start with having really good, clear, and accurate data around our global workforce is key and critical. You have to know your internal workforce as well as your external. You have to know who do we have and where are we getting work done. So when you start that journey, you got to have the roster. Who do I have in my workforce? Where are they? You got to work in with your HRS. You got to know where they're performing. What training and development are we giving them? what skills do they have, which is one of the more critical things that we've seen recently is the understanding the skills of your workforce as we go to a skills-based economy. That's going to be really key and critical. So having that visibility is going to be really key and critical. You're going to have to understand how they're performing, understand what they're doing. And I think from there, you transition to an analysis and understanding of who do we have to retain within our workforce? What are the most important people we have inside of our organization? How do we have a strategy that's going to support retaining them? Because as Ron said, it's going to be really, really hard in the future to go get new talent. And so your key employees that you have are the ones you need to hold on to. And so from there, you really define a strategy. You know, you have to have a workforce strategy that says, hey, what are my talent acquisition needs? Where are we performing well? What partnerships am I going to need from a data perspective to have the insights? That's going to be the next thing you get into beyond the strategy, is so that you have the perspective. Perspective in our world is more and more important every day. And so that's where data partnerships allow us to have that perspective without having to build it ourselves. So evaluating who out there in the marketplace has data and insights that allows you to have a strategic mindset and also start making data-driven decisions.
Excellent. You made some really interesting points about talent inventory, the importance of understanding how an organization consumes talent. And as part of this inventory process, you shared that it's critical to have visibility into who's already on the payroll and essentially sitting within the four walls of your organization. So, Ron, my next question is for you. How does an organization invest and build a loyal workforce, and what are some tips to retaining this top talent?
Yeah, we've seen something happen over the past several decades, and it all makes sense, right? When we start talking about this very large boomer population, you know, they were getting, you know, as they're going on along in their career, they're working really hard. They're learning extra things. They are training themselves essentially, and they end up developing a very well-rounded skill set because they essentially have to. And what happened was corporations started getting rid of their training departments as a result of this, and then they would just put up job postings that had ridiculous job descriptions looking for everything under the sun because they could do that. There was a lot of people to choose from. So what you're seeing now is this is all unwinding. It's going to go back to the way life kind of looked in the 60s and 50s when you hired people, good people, and then developed those people into the roles that you wanted. And in a sense, that kind of creates the loyalty because, right, loyalty went away. The loyalty contract went away over the past several decades because everybody became this kind of free agent mentality. And that is because corporations were really not investing and people were just kind of like, I'm going to advance my career in the way that I want. And I think there's a real opportunity here. If you look at surveys of Gen Zs, they want purpose in their job. They want a growth path. They want to know that, you know, they're creating value. And I think by training and investing in these people and helping them along their career path, you actually get both, all of the things you want. You get an employee with the skill sets that you want, and you get the loyalty that you're looking for. Especially you identify those best employees early, you start to develop them early, and you'll watch them kind of come up through your corporation with that kind of investment.
Yeah, that's great. I've already shared with my team that we're going to be talking a lot about retention with our customers in 2023, and really the importance of employees understanding their value and seeing a clear path for career advancement. And you can't really talk about retention of talent without discussing compensation and wage inflation. So Sarah, I have a two-part question for you. First, do you think wage inflation will stabilize in 2023? And as a follow-up to that question, I'd love your thoughts on why it's important to align rates in the program rate card with the market to ensure that an organization is maintaining quality of talent while not overspending for that talent.
Great, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Ron, in his opening comments, shared with us, you know, what we're all seeing and realizing, right? There is volatility, there is uncertainty. There is this common need, although, you know, we have seen wage inflation. Will it remain is the $1 million question. We have seen that, you know, throughout, you know, the US, Canada, India, where there's a lot of spend within the extended workforce space. We've seen, depending on the country, it plateau a bit, but the $1 million question is, you know, will that continue to increase? But, you know, as we all are feeling what Ron has shared, there is volatility, there is uncertainty. The common need is to spend less and retain cash. But no one really has the luxury of waiting that out, right? There's this mixed bag of reality shifting consistently over time. And so that's why, we definitely feel it is now more than ever important to align your rates, your rate cards to the market to ensure you're not overspending, but also maintaining that quality and efficiency. Rate cards aren't new. What is new is having the data to adjust rate cards. And what also is new is needing to do that frequently along with the market volatility. So this is the artifact, rate cards are the artifact that makes it happen versus negotiating every worker. What we are talking about is leveraging data to hit that optimal point of cost, time to fill, and fillability by location. You can save money without hurting the organization, and you can use the rates aligned to the market to gain credibility with your hiring managers as well.
Excellent. Love hearing all that. And Tim, I'd love to have you piggyback a little bit on that. As we talk about the market volatility and the economic uncertainty, what other data points, in addition to what Sarah just shared, can an organization leverage to pursue strategic business directives?
Yeah, it's a great question. You need to have, like you said before, the visibility in your workforce. You have to know, Sarah's talking about rate cards and how we address, the volatility of the bill rates, but you have to know your internal workforce and the compensation as well. So you're going to have a really strong understanding of, are you competitive in the marketplace? Are your internal salaries and aligned and allowing you to retain the top talent that you have? And is it competitive enough to get new talent? So those are really key critical things that you got to have an understanding of, as in addition to what skills are required. So I kind of go back to that comment I made before, but understanding the skill sets of your workforce, which skill sets are drive premiums, whether it's in compensation or bill rates. Those things are going to be really, really important to have a clear visibility into it, and also have people telling you, giving you proactive alerts as to, hey, you may be here at risk. There may be some exposure here if you don't take care of this part of your workforce, because say demand is spiking and rates are increasing. You want to want proactive visibility into that so that you can make some decisions proactively as possible to prevent attrition and or take advantage of an opportunity in the workplace. So I think those things are going to be key and critical.
Excellent. And I know you had a good example to share for us today too, right?
Yeah, there's the scenario that we were going to drive through and talk about with you all. So the important thing to understand here in this scenario is, it's really not about the recommendations I'm going to make at the end of it, but understanding the ease at which you can have data at your fingertips today with partners, with the availability of data in the marketplace. So we're going to take you through the scenario and give you an understanding of how we approach things. So the scenario is, we have a client of ours that's looking to expand their business operations into Jacksonville, Florida. And historically, that client has had a heavy emphasis on IT project managers, so a lot of volume in that, and had it in quite frankly, in lots of cities in the United States. So once we became aware of this, we wanted to proactively deliver some insights to our client and to help them understand the supply demand for these workers in Jacksonville, Florida, and ultimately get to some recommendations. So if we switch to the next slide, as we started that journey and getting ready for that, the important thing, I think, is in the past several years, maybe the last decade, even the last couple years, in order to engage in this type of conversation with the customer, we had to take the scenario, go phone a friend, get some analysts involved, gather some data, and that could take days, it could take weeks in order to get that all prepared. In our world today, that's all at our fingertips. And I would argue that many of our analysts and our program leaders are going to have this at our fingertips to engage pretty much near real time to have insights for our clients. And so as I work through this scenario, we take a look at the IT project manager in Jacksonville, Florida. We work through our tools that we have to say, all right, well, what is the compensation range for this type of position? And we can see here on this slide, again, the numbers aren't the most important things, but at $95,000 a year approximately, and 12 years of experience is the average. Down below, you can quickly pivot to what is that going to feel like from a cost of living perspective compared to the national average. So these things are at our fingertips. I don't have to go get a data partner or curate data on my own. It's available, it's brought to me. I look on the right, I can see what's going to be like the supply and demand situation with that job in that marketplace. And we can see here, you know, there's a lot of profiles that are matching. So the supply is healthy. Compensation's well south of the US national average, which is great news from a cost savings perspective. But you also look over to the right and you see that posting competition is pretty significant, you know, a little bit higher than average. Below that, I can quickly pivot to understanding, well, what companies in that marketplace have that type of talent? What are the roles or the job titles that they're filling if I have to do some sourcing or if I have to do some searching? So those things are all available to me, delivered via a software platform for me to have those types of insights. And then lastly, it's like, all right, so that's the full-time perspective and view on things. What is it going to feel like from a contingent labor perspective? Is this a good marketplace for us? And so with the tools we have that have machine learning and predictive analytics, if you actually can go back, I'm not done with that one yet, but it's telling us, you know, through that again, machines and predictive algorithms saying, hey, Jacksonville, Florida, based on the data that we have in the contingent space, it may not be an ideal location for you to source from. And by the way, here's your median bill rate that would see in that marketplace. So those are good insights that are going to lead me to say, all right, where do I need to look alternatively, since Jacksonville might not be the best location? So now we can switch to the next slide. And then I'm going to say, all right, let's look around the other cities in the United States and what is the labor economic situation there? Where's their strong talent pools? How much competition is there going to be there? What's the compensation rates going to be? And quickly I can go through this geography explorer and see that, hey, there's 3 cities that really pop as having strong supply, good competition, but reasonable compensation. And I throw out Washington because of the high demand. A lot of people there in Washington that have project management skill sets, but they're also the highest compensation. So quickly switch to the next slide, and I say, all right, well, I want to quickly look into these other 3 locations. And so taking a quick snapshot, lots of other data points available to us, but what I'm bringing here is the quick KPIs and allow you to make a decision and have a conversation quickly about it. And as I look at this, I look at Denver, Baltimore, and Austin again, and see what's going on with the profiles, what's going on with compensation, what's going on with competition, how many employers are competing for that. And as I look through this, I see that Baltimore's starting to pop out for me. They have a lot of people in that marketplace with the skill sets. Their compensation is below the national average. The competition right now is close to the national average. And out of the 3 cities, they have the fewest number of employers that are competing for that talent in the marketplace. So that's giving me a great indicator that, hey, that's from a labor economic situation, I want to go there. And then I pivot over to the bill rate conversation in the contingent space, and I start saying, all right, what does that look like comparatively? Actually, come back, there you go. You know, we have data available to us, look really fast in the moment, that Baltimore is looking better from a bill rate perspective and time to fill perspective, and the role fillability that we get there is saying, hey, that's looking really sharp for us. So as we get to an advisory position with our clients, we're gonna strongly consider that. And then on the right-hand side, you know, throwing in some U.S. benchmarks, understanding that successful placement rate is always going to be very important as we go to acquire new talent. You know, how easily is it going to be to retain them? How can I convert them to permanent? So these are just some benchmarks that we can give based on our experience to give you perspective about how is this going to feel when I go search in in this space in 2023. And what we have seen is that in these benchmarks is that it's gotten quite challenging over the last couple of years in retaining this type of talent, because historically we've been in that 70-80% retention rate or successful placement rate. So, you know, again, pandemic having an effect on our lives today. And then if you switch to the next slide, what our final recommendations to this client would be is that, you know, Baltimore, obviously through our conversation, might be preferred to Jacksonville, because in Jacksonville it's heating up there, healthy supply and low compensation, but you know, there's the things are picking up there, and it's maybe not ideal because it's going to take longer to fill your positions. Time to fill is really important for our clients. And then the alternative is, you know, looking at remote workers. What other locations in the United States might be advantageous for you if your time to fill is critical? So this is just a quick snapshot of, you know, things that we can bring to the conversation in real time, and showcasing how much easier it is in today's world to have that at your fingertips, to have an advisory position with your clients.
Yeah, I love that, Tim. And obviously I'm biased because my team utilizes Lightcast and TDX daily, and I know that's the two platforms we utilize to put that analysis together. But I think what's great is that, and me being a data nerd, you don't have to necessarily be an analytics expert to be able to leverage that information and formulate the analysis and kind of the direction for which you just presented, right? It's easily consumable and something that even again, if you're not a data expert, you'd be able to pull quite a bit of value from that. So my next question is for Ron. So Tim just shared this great example of how data can be leveraged to drive decision making, but we're still faced with all of this uncertainty and this fluctuating market. With all that, what scenarios do you see playing out, and what questions should a business leader be asking to help be prepared for these scenarios?
Yeah, I think that what happens a lot, and Sarah kind of mentioned this before, is you start to hear some bad news or some, they do a CEO survey and these people are like, I just don't know, I'm going to hold off on hiring anything. And they start almost projecting that to everybody else. It just kind of, bad news kind of becomes contagious. And what happens is you take your eye off the ball, because now you're protecting that kind of short-term cash instead of thinking, what is my long-term strategy? And you can't ever do that. That somebody has to be thinking about those kind of things. But at the same time, what I was trying to point out is this development, what you're going to experience over the next 10 to 15 years, has never happened before. So you need to have a plan. You need to start executing the plan now. You need to start looking at the way that you consume labor. Why did you create the positions that you created? What were the roles that those people were doing? And you have to start to do that assessment. It was mentioned before. You have to fully be aware of the people that you have, how you're utilizing them, how you're developing them. Why do you lose people? What is attractive about your organization? And that can all be lost or blown out in a time of economic movements. If we go through a recession, and I don't, everybody's kind of weighing in their side, but if we do, that's something that's going to kind of come through, blip through, and going to keep going. The labor shortage is here to stay. People have talked about there will be all these layoffs. Well, we can't lay them off, because at one point we had almost 12 million job openings, but we only hired, maybe a million people during this time. So what we would like to do is, if in a recession, you typically are releasing a lot of people back into the labor force, and you kind of get this equilibrium. But that's not going to happen this time. There's just not people to release. We had a lot of people who dropped out. So I'm just, begging companies, keep your eye on the ball. Start to develop your long-term 5 to 10 year strategy about how do you utilize labor going forward. If you don't, then what just happened with these pay increases? You're going to get stuck in this game state competition with everybody else. Oh, they raised it $1, I'll raise it $3. I'll do this. You can't just keep sitting there going to war for the same people. It wasn't attracting people off the sideline. All of these pay increases weren't increasing labor force participation. I already showed you those numbers stayed flat. So it was never about the money. So what happens is you can get into this kind of really bad kind of death spiral where you just keep raising wages. And by the way, that's not a strategy. Oh, our strategy is just going to be to try to keep outspending everybody else around us. It's not a strategy. So don't lose your focus. Start to figure out how you're going to address problems going forward. What if the labor shortage continues for your company? What if what we go through this year is very temporary and we're right back to the path that we're on? Please don't keep asking the question to me 8 months from now, well, when is the wage inflation part going to end? It's like, well, what are you doing to alleviate that problem in your company?
Great answer. Sarah, any additional points that you might want to share on that topic of that question?
Yeah, just one, one scenario that I think we're seeing, we talked about this a bit, that we're seeing quite a bit, or being a common situation, is organizations needing to inform their labor strategies, particularly IT, and when to offshore versus onshore. We're seeing this as a very common initiative, especially with rate inflation and having to take advantage of, being nimble and looking at different locations or supplier strategies. So we're also seeing oftentimes, what skills should we offshore versus onshore? What skills should we source through what types of suppliers? Is it BPO? Should we be, what are we spending today with our BPO providers versus staff aug? And what types of skills should we be shifting to one or the other. As Tim showed in the scenario, we are making this easier and better to make these types of decisions through data and the market intelligence. And I think, that's the common theme throughout these questions and answers. But, this is, I couldn't go without, raising that type of situation, because it is a common one. And if not something as an organization you're looking at, it's also a perfect scenario, if you will, to take a look at.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I think when you understand your workforce and the skills that you have, and what skills lend themselves out to other opportunities and other careers that are out there. So if you're looking at retaining and developing your workforce, like we've been talking about, so what additional training you could give someone with a specific skill set that allowed them to take on a different or a bigger job within your organization, or transition to another one, which helps you retain that talent. So those are all things, as you get to that skills and to training and development, it really becomes key and critical. You have line of sight. I go back to that visibility and how are we performing and where are we showing up. Your knowledge of that and understanding of the marketplace and how that's shifting around. We're seeing lots of opportunities come out from our data partnerships that we have with Lightcast and Brightfield to say, hey, if you have this skill set, this really lends itself well to doing these other jobs. And again, those opportunities that you present to our people will drive retention, drive loyalty, and drive career progression and growth. And that labor shortage that we're experiencing, that's going to be one of the key drivers of your workforce strategy in the future.
Right. So we have a little over 20 minutes. I think it's a great time for us to reach out to the audience to see if there are any questions coming through the chat. We do have one. Ron, I'm going to point this one in your direction. Illegal immigration has been high in the last 2 years. How will that affect the labor market?
Yeah, actually, I put a post on LinkedIn about this. It's been our saving grace. So if we look at job growth in the past year, you look at payroll job growth, which was up about 1 million, and yet household survey at that time, up until last month, was still in the negative. And when you look at the survey itself, and you look at BLS surveys, they tell you that they actually don't ask companies the legal status of the workers on their payroll. So when you started to do the math, you started to realize the industries that were getting some of these jobs filled, the fact that we were seeing manufacturing orders being fulfilled, but we were seeing food production actually at a record high, despite people believing that those industries wouldn't be staffed. We realized that the undocumented population was probably accounting for pretty much all of the net growth that we were seeing in payroll jobs. One of the things, I didn't have time to say it in the slides, but it's something that's so critical to understand. The reason you're eating right now is probably because of these undocumented workers. So rather than kind of taking that and putting that into this bucket of maybe fear or misunderstanding, I think as a nation, as companies, we just need to get a lot more involved in the process of it. There are companies that literally know how to go get those people. Once you're familiar with that community, you're able to kind of harness more of those workers. But I want to say something real quick before I cut off on this topic, and that is we have several programs in this country. I mean, everybody's used to the H-1B, the technical workers that come in. Now there's an H-2A program. These are the workers that come in and do the farming and agriculture. So that's about 377,000 people. That's an uncapped program. So you can get as many of those people in here. They travel around the country and they harvest things. Then there's a program called H-2B. H-2B are people who help with seasonal labor, and that one's capped at 66,000. That cap was developed in 1971. So it was at a time that the boomers were coming in to the tune of almost 900,000 net new a year. And so they capped that because they didn't need that additional competition for labor like we were seeing back then. That cap still exists in 2023, and they raised it 20,000 about a month ago, and the positions were taken within like minutes because the demand is probably several 100,000. So it's one of these things where we have to start to look at these and go, we could probably alleviate the undocumented problem by just either getting rid of the cap entirely or just managing it to a lot more efficient way than we're doing right now. But I think it also starts with people understanding that there's a necessary part of this. And I think the biggest thing for us and the people on this call is educate yourself about it, see what you can do to weigh in at a local or national level. But it's going to help a lot to just learn a lot more about that population.
Excellent. Thanks for that answer. Tim, can you share insights on how to begin the shift to task-based workforce planning as a long-term budget control strategy?
Yeah, it goes back to, understanding that workforce, having that baseline visibility, understanding the work that's getting done, and deconstructing it. And so, of your workforce, who do you have? What are they doing? What systems do I have available to me to go get that data and bring it together? So there's an incredible amount of work that goes into all that, and so you can't underestimate that. But bringing all that together, understanding, again, decomposing it down to the roles, the tasks, the skill sets that you have in your workforce, how do those all things come together to deliver work to your organization, and really understanding so that visibility is key and critical. It lives within your HIRSs, it lives within your VMSs, your ATSs. All of these things help you have visibility into that entire workforce, bringing that together. Having the ability to align things, whether it's taxonomies around occupations, it's skill sets, like what skills do line up with what occupations, and what do those things cost? And so how much am I going to have to spend on a specific skill in order to accomplish a task? So bringing all that visibility into a tool, you can call it a BI platform, you can call it a workforce planning software. All those things are available in the marketplace to help you bring data together, have the visibility, understanding your company's revenue projections. Where are you going? How fast are you going to go there? Are you forecasting growth or retraction? That goes into that workforce planning strategy. Tells you how much you can consume, how much you're going to have available to get to your business objectives. So there's a lot of big buzzwords in there, but it comes down to pulling it all together, having visibility, conducting the analysis, having the right people in your organization that can do the analysis, or the right partners that help you on that journey. So that's where you start.
Excellent. And this one's a call out to Ron. So some governors have relaxed the state government requirement for diplomas. Is this a trend that will accelerate, or will it be slow to pick up speed from what you're hearing?
It's funny is there's kind of bursts. Sometimes things gain, sometimes they go backwards. It's really hard to say at this point. I feel that around several, not just that issue, but a number of issues, that it's all starting to dawn on people. We have, whether it's immigration, and you're starting to see people from both parties go, hey, we're starting to recognize that maybe we have to talk about this, whether it be aspects of what limits work, what kind of laws do we have that make it so that people don't want to work, or people who are working maybe aren't in the best position to do that. I think as this keeps going on, you have a Fed chair right now who keeps raising interest rates, and he's trying to cool off an economy, and he's not getting the results that he wants. Well, why is he not? Because there's no one he's trying to get businesses to lay off people and ease up this labor pressure, the raise in rates that we're seeing in the market. But this isn't the market that we've ever seen before. So everybody's starting to realize this is unprecedented. So will things gain momentum? I believe that they will, just out of just the sheer stubbornness of the way this labor market's behaving. The pace at which that happens, I'm not so optimistic. I think you're going to continue to see almost like fits and starts, almost falling forward, as we would kind of say it, so that we get to some of these kind of better ways of dealing with things over the next year or so. But I think right now you're going to see, I keep going back to this, but you have all these companies like, whoa, we're about to have a recession, and I know what that looks like. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't know what this one looks like. You know what some others look like. The timing of the housing recession when the boomers were, all in their like 50s, really the worst possible timing for that recession, had a really significant impact. Well, those people have now moved on, and now there's not a population of that age behind them. So this is going to look very, very different. And I think as soon as companies go, this is different, as soon as governments go, this is different, then they'll start to commit to other actions.
Excellent. The next question is a little bit more broad. I'll ask, and then I'll actually ask for both Sarah and Ron to answer. Do you have data and analytics for other countries and global regions? I, of course, know that both of your platforms do have a global reach, but Sarah, I'll let you answer on behalf of Brightfield.
Yes, the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. To kind of add some flavor to that is, there are, our data represents about 100 plus countries. However, naturally, organizations tend to hire or spend, if you will, within countries where there is predominant extended workforce. So obviously, there's 40 to 50 countries that we see having, the most or strongest population, if you will, of extended workforce. And then, of course, there's extended workforce everywhere, but of course, just naturally, organizations tend to hire within, the top, I'd say 40, 50. But yes, short answer is yes. Ron?
Excellent.
Yeah. As for our side, if you go to lightcast.io, that's actually our web address, lightcast.io. We have a global product. I'm actually on our own website. We actually don't mention how many countries we have. There's quite a few in there right now. We have profiles data, there's government data. Basically, the more that we are able to glean and scraping job boards and such, the more we're kind of figuring out what positions pay. As anybody knows who's tried to do global data, some governments are excellent at doing it like Singapore, and some are horrible at doing it like a lot of other countries. So it really kind of is this mixed bag, but we do have a global product. It's actually, I think, our fastest growing segment right now, because there's just such a hunger for this. To that extent, there is an article that was written by my colleague here at Lightcast called Global Demographic Drought. That came out last year. I highly suggest reading that. The situation that we're in, and I didn't go into it in depth today, but I have spoken on this a lot. If you think our birth rate is bad, which it is unbelievable in other parts of the world. As everybody knows, Japan's population is free falling. It will go from 128 million to 53 million over the next several decades. China has now at reverse. Russia's losing about 1 million people a year. Korea obviously is shrinking. Germany, Italy, all on decline. So this is something that we kind of tell people, you can run, but you can't hide. Mexico has the same, their birth rate's going down, same unemployment rate as the US. 65% of Mexican firms say they have labor shortages right now. So immigration is going to stop being a path for our growth forward because other countries are going to need these people. But it does, once again, this goes back to what we've been talking about. Educate yourself. Start to think about the countries that you would want to maybe go to and what's happening in their populations. How much of that population is not being fully utilized. This is going to be the future as well. So this comes with get the knowledge, get the data, and go forward.
Great. So the next one is got a comment and a few questions in there. So I'll just throw it out to the panel, and I'd love to actually get viewpoints from each of you. Is labor going to be labeled as a finite resource moving forward? If a labor shortage is here to stay, companies are going to be forced to adjust operations to accommodate, correct? Seems that many firms are adjusting size of labor force to lean operations in anticipation of this. And Ron, you kind of kicked off with this, and the fact that companies are just going to have to learn how to do business differently.
Real quick on this, because I met with a very, very large fast food company at the beginning of last year. By middle part of last year, they had already started to enact some of the changes that I had discussed with them. And one is, if you're fast food, why do you need a restaurant? Let the restaurants be a restaurant. You can be a drive-through. I mean, that's fast food. So they were literally starting to bulldoze some of their establishments and replacing the restaurant with just a fast food kind of setup. Now that took off, and that's happening in some other fast food places. And that's what I've been kind of talking to manufacturing companies about, or other companies who have retail sides, is to say, what is it that you need to be great at? How can you deliver that model in a much, much labor intensive way? Now, for anybody who's on this call who's over the age of like 50, like I am, you're in shock because we were obsessed with unemployment. We were obsessed with the fear that robots were going to take jobs or AI was going to take jobs. And now you hear me saying, you wish robots could take jobs. You wish AI could take jobs. They're never going to take the amount of jobs that we need. Projected, I think around the globe is like a 20 million, 25 million labor shortage, over the next 2 or 3 decades. Like, this is a significant problem. So one way that you help solve that problem is by switching your focus from being kind of how do we consume as much labor for all the PR that gives us in a market, and start to change that to how can we ease our requirements on a market so the mom and pop shops can hire people, or other businesses that we need, like with the restaurants we want to eat at, are able to actually hire people as well. Crazy thinking that we would even be in that situation. But I challenge everyone who's listening to this, you know it. You're feeling it right now. You're going out to eat. and unable to sit in a certain part of the restaurant, or you're noticing help wanted signs on a lot of places. This is what's happening. Yes, it is a finite labor pool.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the things that we've noticed internally, and it's a strong focus for us, is where do you have workers in your workforce that maybe are doing things that they shouldn't be doing? So where are they taking on work and tasks? And as we try to decompose all of that, like, why do we have a project manager doing analysis? Why do we have coders spending 80% of their time in meetings? So those things, once you have that knowledge and awareness, you can start saying, hey, I need to have different things, different places, and different people doing different work. The other thing we're deploying is automation technology to help us with our existing workforce. To how do we take some of the mundane tasks off their plate, and so that they can focus on the higher touch, need a human involved type of work. So that those combinations of understanding and visibility, and then finding out where you have people doing work that you could automate, key and critical in the labor shortage that we have. Because again, Ron's telling us, there's not those people, they're not going to magically appear. So we've got to figure out alternative strategies to deploying technology and our people to grow our organizations.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think this is why it's so important to be not just creating efficiencies through digital transformation, but also across your workforce. What is the right mix? Like Tim has said, do you have the right workers in the right roles? Are they being effective? And I think this is why everything we talked about today is kind of, feeding into the answer to this question, which is, this is why it is so important to understand, what does your workforce look like today? What are your skill needs today? What is the right mix? What is the right cost? What are the right locations? All of these data points feed into creating that efficient workforce that, of course, makes the whole limited workforce in the market, scalable, if you will.
Yeah.
Excellent. And before we kind of come to closing thoughts, we have one more question. We've talked a lot about retention. So another question from the audience, I'd love for each of you to share, whether it be your thoughts or maybe what you're each seeing for, within your own organizations. What are you seeing as a trend to retain top employees?
That's a good question, isn't it? I would say this is kind of a tough question to answer, just because when you talk about top employees, these are people, a lot of people don't like sports analogies. I'm not a huge fan of them, but I got to kind of use this. There can happen to be this free agent mentality, which is you get a great worker and then everybody wants to come take your great worker. It happens in a lot of places. You obviously see it in sports. And what happens is that what you're not realizing is just a lot of great people in your organization. There should be multiple people that you would be identifying in that particular thing. Now, that being said, I'm going to put that to the side. I want to really go to the heart of this question. And that is, there's been surveys run for years. People don't leave, they leave bosses, they don't leave corporations, whatever these kind of things are. I think it really does come down to, if somebody really thinks that what they're doing is really valuable, if they love the mission of what you're doing, if they love the work that they're doing, money, all of those things get put to the side, especially if we're just going to assume, as Sarah said, let's assume that you're already paying around market. It's a lot of people, when they get to a certain part of their career, especially your star people, aren't really chasing the dollars as much as they're chasing the experience. And if they feel that they've grown stale, or your company you're in, is starting to protect cash, and so they're no longer investing, they're no longer trying to do the new thing, they're no longer expanding, your best workers, by all great reasons, should leave your organization, because these are people who want to do the next thing. They want to keep growing. So if you think of these people, if you want to retain, look at your own corporation. Do you still have that driving, progressive mindset that you had when these people came in? That is it attractive to a person who's a star player? Star players want to play on great teams. Why? Because they want to win awards? Well, no, they want to win. And you want that. You want workers who want to win. But if you don't have a winning environment, don't be surprised if they leave.
Excellent. I've got one more for Sarah that just came through. We are hearing about increasing layoffs, particularly in the tech industry, and the expectation is that rates should come down. What is your view?
Yeah, so if you look at, I think 2021, 2022 was, we all saw it, right? We saw the supply and demand of labor driving rates higher, particularly, well, not just the extended workforce, the total workforce. And all of a sudden we're seeing this, little bit of a shift at the end of 2022, moving into 2023. It's really interesting because we still are dealing with inflation, which in essence would mean, then rates go up as well. But we're also seeing, with all the layoffs in the markets, we're also seeing a higher supply, less demand, which of course also drives rates down. If we took a look at, we did an analysis across US, India, Canada within the IT skill set, and we actually saw, across the second half of 2021, through 2022, we saw, rates within IT increase, except for, countries like Canada where it plateaued, and in India we actually saw come down. So I think, to answer the question, I think keeping in tune in real time with what is happening in the market, that supply and demand is shifting, despite there's inflation, and this is the perfect time to look at, don't increase rates just to increase rates and think that's going to help you procure and maintain talent. That's not necessarily the right answer. We've actually seen organizations be able to create more competitiveness in their rates, especially if you increase them in 2022, and especially if you're looking at locations, particularly like offshore locations. And so my answer would be to don't just assume increasing rates will help procure and maintain talent. You can remain competitive from a cost perspective, but also take into consideration things like current turnover, current time to fill, and all those indicators and all those factors that you need to take into consideration.
Great answer. So we're down to 2 minutes. Tim, 30 seconds or less. What's one thing that you'd like today's attendees to take away from our call today?
Yeah, from a closing thoughts perspective, it's get on the journey to workforce visibility if you aren't already there. Don't underestimate the effort that it's going to take, and embrace partnerships. We had a mindset at Allegis for a long time that we had to do everything ourselves, pride and ownership. We've pivoted quite significantly to embracing partnerships so that we can go faster and we have more data and the right data. So my two closing thoughts.
Ron?
30 seconds or less. So I would say that the conversations that we're having right now need to be had at an executive level. This is no longer, I've been saying this for 2 years, it's not an HR problem anymore. HR has a responsibility, as well as hiring managers, to bring data into the conversation. It's no longer something where you can just say, hey, it's tough out there. Executives need to start going, hey, we're trying to increase our business. We're going to invest in these other things. No, that's part of the equation. What is your workforce plan? It feels like HR has been talking about this for a long time. It's different now, because if you actually want to get work done, if you actually want to produce product, if you want to meet your goals, if you want to expand your business, it's going to be around your ability to acquire and then retain talent.
And Sarah?
I'll be quick. It's 2023. There's this evolved ecosystem of solutions and services that help you get, to what you need faster, better. Don't underutilize your options if it's on the services side, technology, data. Thank you.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, thanks to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to our experts for sharing their perspectives and their knowledge. I hope you're all leaving this discussion better informed on how to navigate these ongoing labor force challenges. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks all.
Thank you.